Welcome to my channel, Secret of America. The master of Mississippi always picked the most vulnerable men to fight, but nobody could have predicted what followed. Deep in the heart of Mississippi, in 1858, Master Calvin Thornwood had a savage ritual. Whenever a slave stopped being useful, he summoned them for one last battle right in the center of the plantation, beneath a burning sun, with everyone watching. The terms were straightforward. Win and walk free. Lose and die trying. For the master, it was a method to get rid of those who no longer served his purposes and to plant terror in the rest. He'd call out anyone, a frail elder, a feeble young laborer, even a sickly boy. His brutality was the plantation's entertainment. 23 men had stood before him. 23 men had fallen. But on a suffocating August morning, something entirely different unfolded. The men Thornwood summoned that day had been behaving oddly for weeks, moving with less urgency, coughing more often, stumbling across the fields. Everyone assumed he was fading. Everyone, that is, except one person. When the master issued his challenge, the entire plantation went dead silent. The frail man stepped forward. No fear behind his eyes. No hesitation in his stride. And in that instant, some of the elder slaves recognized something, a pattern they had witnessed before. A strategy far older than the plantation itself. What followed would change everything. But the master had no idea what was headed his way. Before we go on with this remarkable story of vengeance, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Let's continue. Thornwood Plantation stretched across 4,000 acres of Mississippi Delta earth, rich, dark soil that yielded cotton without end. The kind of land that built fortunes for white men and broke the bodies of black people. In 1858, the plantation was running at full capacity. 312 enslaved people worked from sunup to sundown, 6 days a week, with only Sunday afternoons to rest. They occupied rows of crude cabins behind the main house, slept on wooden boards, survived on rations of cornmeal and salt pork, dressed in the cheapest cloth available, and existed in a permanent state of exhaustion and dread. Calvin Thornwood owned every inch of it. He had inherited the plantation from his father, Richard Thornwood, in 1851. Calvin was 28 when he assumed control, young, driven, and desperate to prove himself more formidable than his father. Richard had been a conventional plantation owner. Cruel, certainly, but with a predictable cruelty, whippings for violations, sales that tore families apart, labor pushed until bodies gave out. Standard methods of control, no different from what any other plantation used. But Calvin wanted something greater. He craved absolute dominance. He wanted his enslaved people to fear him in ways they had never feared his father. He studied methods of control, consumed books about breaking horses, and applied those principles to breaking human beings. He developed techniques of psychological torment, of unpredictable violence, of spectacles engineered to traumatize and terrify. And his most powerful spectacle was the fights. The ritual began in March of 1855. A slave named Abraham had turned 63 that year. His hands were twisted with arthritis. His back was permanently hunched from decades in the fields. He couldn't match the pace of younger workers, and he dragged down the productivity of his crew. Calvin watched him struggle for a week. Then one morning he called Abraham to the center of the workyard and announced to all those gathered that Abraham would fight him. If Abraham won, he'd go free. If he lost, well, he wouldn't have any need for freedom. Abraham was terrified. He knew he had no real chance against a healthy, vigorous master. But what options did he have? Refuse and be beaten to death. At least fighting offered a faint hope of survival. So he fought. Raised his arthritic fists and tried to defend himself. Calvin toyed with him for 30 seconds, letting him throw feeble, wayward punches. Then Calvin struck back. One crushing blow to Abraham's jaw. The old man dropped and didn't rise. Calvin kicked him in the ribs, in the head, across his back, kept kicking until Abraham stopped moving, stopped breathing, died in the dirt while 300 people bore witness. Calvin stood over the body, chest heaving, covered in Abraham's blood, and he smiled. He scanned the horrified faces around him. Anyone else want to slow down? Want to become useless? This is what happens. This is what awaits you, The message was unmistakable. Work until you collapse, or die fighting. Those were the only choices. Word of Calvin's method spread to other plantation owners. Some condemned it. Charles Morrison from the neighboring property told Calvin he was destroying valuable property, that selling off old or sick slaves made better financial sense than killing them. Calvin disagreed. Fear is worth more than the sale price of a worn-out slave. One dead man in the dirt teaches 100 others to work harder. The productivity gain more than covers the loss, and he was right. In the months following Abraham's death, output on Thornwood Plantation climbed by 12%. People labored through agony, concealed illness, and pushed past their limits, because the alternative was the circle, the master's fists, death in full view of everyone. The system functioned, and Calvin kept applying it. Over 3 years, 23 men died in that circle. Not all of them were old. Not all were ill. Some were simply unlucky, a mishap that left them partially disabled, a fever that hollowed them out, a cough that wouldn't quit. Anything that marked a man as less than fully productive made him a target. Calvin would observe, would wait until someone could no longer hide their decline, then call them forward, make them fight, make them die. 23 deaths. 23 names. 23 histories. 23 families left to mourn. Abraham was first. Then Isaac, whose broken leg never healed cleanly. Then Moses, who had developed a lung condition. Then Samuel, whose back injury prevented him from lifting heavy loads. Then Josiah, who had gone partially blind. One by one, month after month, the death count grew, and the fear with it. But fear cultivates other things as well. Resentment. Hatred. And in certain people, a deep resolve to resist. Open rebellion was not an option. Mississippi law had been constructed to prevent it. Any gathering of more than 5 enslaved people without white supervision was illegal. Teaching them to read was illegal. Enslaved people testifying against white people in court was illegal. The entire legal apparatus existed to make organized resistance impossible. But the enslaved found other means. Quiet means. Patient means. Methods that would remain invisible until the precise moment they were needed. Elijah was one of those patient ones. Born in 1824 on a plantation in South Carolina, his mother's name was Ruth. His father's name he never knew. It could have been any of several white men who had violated his mother over the years. Elijah was sold at 15 when his original master died and the estate was liquidated. A trader purchased him, bound him in a coffle with 20 others, marched them overland to Mississippi, and sold them at auction in Jackson. Elijah went to Richard Thornwood for $850, considered a sound investment. Young, strong, intelligent enough to pick up tasks quickly, but not, they believed, intelligent enough to be dangerous. Elijah had been on Thornwood Plantation for 19 years. He had watched Richard Thornwood run it for 4 years. He had watched Calvin take over in 1851. He had observed the shift from conventional brutality to Calvin's refined sadism. He had witnessed all 23 deaths in the circle. And through all of it, Elijah had been careful. Had performed the role of the compliant slave, a hard worker, obedient, unthreatening. Never gave the overseers cause to single him out. Never drew attention. Just survived. And watched. Always watched. Because Elijah was studying. He was analyzing Calvin's methods, dissecting how the fights played out. Calvin was powerful, no question. 6 feet tall, 200 pounds of muscle, with raw athletic ability. But he was untrained. He knew no formal fighting techniques. He relied on rage and brute force, on his opponents being weak, terrified, and incapable of mounting any real defense. Against old men and sick boys, that was more than sufficient. But what would happen against someone who could actually resist? Someone younger and stronger who understood what they were doing? That question consumed Elijah. But he had no combat training, no knowledge of fighting beyond the desperate brawls that occasionally erupted between enslaved men. No techniques that could help him overcome a man who outweighed him by 40 pounds. So Elijah did something quietly revolutionary. He turned to the oldest people on the plantation, those who still remembered Africa, who had been transported on slave ships, who carried within them the memory of lives before bondage. There was a woman named Sarah. She had been on Thornwood Plantation for 43 years, brought from West Africa in 1815 at 22 years old. She had endured the Middle Passage. She had survived 4 decades of enslavement. In 1858 she was 65. Too worn for heavy field work, but kept alive because of her value as a midwife and healer. She knew plants and medicines, could deliver babies, could treat illness. The plantation had need of her skills even as her body failed. But Sarah also possessed knowledge the white people knew nothing about. Combat techniques from her homeland. The Igbo people, from what is now Nigeria, had warrior traditions. They understood how to fight larger opponents, knew pressure points and vulnerable areas of the human body, knew how to turn an enemy's strength back against him. That knowledge had no place in slavery. Using it would only get you killed. But Sarah remembered. And when Elijah approached her quietly one evening and asked if she knew how to fight, she understood exactly what he was planning. Asterisk, you want to face the master. Asterisk, it wasn't a question. They were alone near the well. No one could overhear. Elijah nodded. Asterisk, I'm tired of watching people die. Tired of living in fear. I want to do something, even if it kills me. I want to at least try. Asterisk, Sarah studied him. She saw the determination. Saw the anger that had been building for 19 years. Then she spoke. Asterisk, I can teach you, not everything, that would take years. But enough. Enough to maybe win a fight if your opponent doesn't expect real resistance. Asterisk. Over the following months, Sarah taught Elijah in secret. After dark, in hidden places, she showed him where to strike for maximum effect, the solar plexus to drive the wind out, the liver to produce crippling pain, the throat to cut off breath, the eyes to blind, the knees to buckle a man. She taught him leverage, how a smaller body could throw a larger one, how to redirect force rather than absorb it head-on. She taught him footwork, how to move, how to slip strikes, how to create angles. Ancient knowledge, carried across an ocean and preserved through decades of bondage, now sharpened for one desperate purpose. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. Elijah needed opportunity. He needed Calvin to choose him for the circle. But Calvin only selected the visibly declining. So Elijah had to become weak. He had to persuade everyone, including Calvin, that he was deteriorating, that he was becoming a liability, that he deserved to be called out. In June of 1858, Elijah began his performance. He started moving slower across the fields, would let his cotton sack slip as if his grip had failed, would stumble over flat ground, would cough frequently as if a lung disease were taking hold. Small details at first, easy to dismiss as temporary, but consistent. Day after day, week after week, the act deepened. Elijah shed weight deliberately, eating less, making himself look gaunt. He hollowed his cheeks, rounded his shoulders to appear diminished, moved as though every task demanded everything he had. The overseers took notice. Marcus Cain, the head overseer, a brutal man who had held the position for 6 years, reported to Calvin that Elijah appeared to be deteriorating fast. Don't know what's wrong with him. Consumption, maybe, or just plain worn out. But he's dragging down his whole crew. Calvin came to observe. He watched Elijah for several days, the stumbling, the coughing, the apparent fragility, and concluded that Elijah was used up. That he would soon need to be disposed of. He began planning the next demonstration. But one person saw through the performance. Sarah knew, obviously, she was part of the plan. But there was also a young woman named Grace. 23 years old, born on the plantation, beautiful despite everything slavery had taken from her, and she was in love with Elijah. They had been together for 2 years. Enslaved people couldn't legally marry, but they were together in every sense that mattered. Grace knew Elijah better than anyone. She knew his real strength. She knew his mind. And she realized what he was doing. She confronted him one night when they were alone in his cabin. You're planning something. Planning to get called to the circle. Planning to fight Calvin. Elijah didn't deny it. He couldn't lie to her. I have to do something. I can't just wait to get old and die in that circle like everyone else. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You'll die anyway. Even if you win the fight, they'll kill you after. You know that. There's no escaping this. Elijah took her hands. Maybe. Probably. But I'd rather die fighting than die begging. I'd rather die trying to hurt him than die for his entertainment. And maybe I won't die. Maybe there's a way through this. A way to escape. To be free. Grace wanted to believe him. Wanted to hold on to the hope. But she had watched 23 men die and had no reason to think Elijah's story would end differently. If you go through with this, she said, I'm losing you. One way or another, you'll be gone. Then come with me, Elijah said. If I make it out, if I somehow escape, come with me. We'll run together. Find freedom together. Grace pulled away. That's a dream. A fantasy. No one escapes Mississippi. The slave catchers always find you. Always bring you back. And even if you reach the north, I'm a woman. I can't run the way you can. I'd slow you down. Get us both caught. She was crying now. I love you. But I won't watch you die in that circle. When they call your name, I'll look away. I can't see it happen. Elijah understood. It was too much to ask. Too much to expect of anyone. He held her while she cried, memorizing everything, the way she felt, the way she smelled, knowing this might be their last night together. That his plan would end in freedom or in death. That either way, this life was over. After she left, he lay awake and thought about turning back. About letting the plan go. About just continuing to endure. But he couldn't. He had gone too far. Committed too completely. He had to see it through. The call came on August 15, 1858. A Monday morning, thick with humidity even before dawn. By noon the temperature would reach 95 degrees. The field workers assembled in the workyard for their assignments. The overseers were organizing crews when Calvin stepped out from the main house. He was dressed casually, white linen shirt, dark trousers, leather boots, and he walked with the ease of a man who had never lost. A man who had killed 23 and felt untouchable. Marcus Kane struck the bell. 3 sharp blows, the signal that meant stop everything. The signal that meant someone was about to die. All work halted. All 312 enslaved people gathered. They knew what was coming. Had seen it 23 times before. Knew the ritual in its entirety. The circle scratched into the dirt. The fight that was never really a fight. The death that was always inevitable. Some looked resigned. Some looked terrified. All looked trapped. Calvin surveyed the crowd. Let the tension swell. Let the fear move through the mass of people. Savored the power of the moment. Then he spoke. Asterisk, we've got dead weight on this plantation. People who aren't pulling their share. People consuming resources without producing value. Asterisk, his gaze found Elijah in the crowd. Asterisk, Elijah. Step forward. Asterisk. The crowd parted. Elijah walked through the opening, head down, shoulders slumped, each step heavy with the appearance of exhaustion and defeat. He stopped 15 feet from Calvin. Didn't look up. Played his role without a flaw. You've been declining, Calvin said. Asterisk, getting weak. Becoming useless. I've been watching you, stumbling around, coughing, barely able to work. So we're going to settle this the usual way. You and me. Right here. Right now. Same rules as always. You win, you're free. You lose, asterisk, he smiled. That smile the enslaved knew to dread. Asterisk, well. You won't have to worry about being tired anymore. Asterisk. The white overseers laughed. They stood in a loose ring around the workyard, 6 of them, each armed with whips or clubs, all there to make certain no enslaved person interfered. All confident in how this would end. They had seen it 23 times. Knew the outcome. Another enslaved man dead in the dirt. Another reminder of who held power. Just another day at Thornwood Plantation. But then something made Calvin go still. Elijah raised his head. Looked directly into Calvin's eyes. And smiled. Not the smile of submission. Not the smile of fear. A knowing smile. The smile of someone carrying a secret. Asterisk, I accept your challenge, Master. Let's see what happens. Asterisk. The way Elijah said Master was wrong. It carried mockery. Carried disrespect. Carried a confidence that had no business being there. Calvin felt something he didn't recognize, a flicker of doubt. But he had issued the challenge, had witnesses all around him, and could not withdraw without appearing weak. Asterisk, Marcus. Mark the circle. Asterisk, Marcus Kane scratched a circle into the dirt with a stick, 20 feet across, the standard size. 23 men had died inside that ring. It was about to be 24. Calvin pulled off his shirt. Revealed what was underneath, 6 feet tall, 200 pounds of muscle, arms thick from years of physical work, a broad chest and powerful shoulders. 35 years old and in his prime. He looked exactly like what he was, a dangerous man. The enslaved people who had never seen him unclothed murmured. Their fear deepened. How could anyone fight that? Then Elijah removed his shirt, and everything shifted. His body was not wasted at all. He was lean and sharply defined, muscles clearly visible beneath skin mapped with scars across his back, his chest, his arms, testimony to 19 years of bondage. But beneath those scars was strength. Real strength. Not the exhaustion he had been performing for 2 months. His actual body. Grace's breath caught. Sarah gave the smallest nod. A few of the older enslaved people who had suspected the truth allowed themselves a grim smile. The deception was exposed. Calvin stared. Rage began to build. You've been playing me. Pretending to be weak. Making a fool of me. Elijah shrugged. You chose to believe what you saw. Decided I was dying. That's not something I did to you, that's something you did to yourself. The audacity of it was staggering. Enslaved people did not speak to masters this way. Did not display defiance. Did not mock. Calvin's hands tightened into fists. I'm going to kill you slowly. Make you regret every word, every lie, every moment you thought you were clever. Maybe, Elijah said. Or maybe today is the day you discover you're not invincible. That you can be beaten. That you can bleed. He rolled his shoulders, loosened his neck, bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, moved like someone who understood his own body. Like someone who had trained. Calvin felt the doubt sharpen, but rage overtook it. This slave needed to be destroyed. Needed to be made into an example. Needed to die badly. Marcus dropped his hand. The fight began. Calvin surged forward immediately. His standard approach, overwhelming aggression, drove the opponent back with mass and violence. It had worked 23 times. But Elijah didn't retreat. Didn't flinch. He stepped sideways at the last instant, let Calvin's momentum carry him past, and as Calvin stumbled through, Elijah drove his elbow hard into Calvin's ribs, precisely placed, all his weight and leverage behind it. 2 ribs snapped. Calvin gasped. Pain tore through his chest. He had never been hurt in these fights. Had never known what it felt like to be on the receiving end. The shock hit nearly as hard as the injury itself. He turned and faced Elijah. Saw that the man was still smiling. That one's for Abraham, Elijah said quietly. The first man you killed. Calvin roared and charged again, swinging a massive fist at Elijah's head, but Elijah dropped beneath it, came up inside Calvin's guard, and landed 3 quick punches to his midsection. Solar plexus. Liver. Kidney. Sarah's teaching, strike the soft targets, cause maximum damage, disable rather than simply wound. Calvin staggered. Every punch had landed exactly where it was meant to. His breath came in ragged gasps. The fractured ribs made each inhale an ordeal. The liver shot sent nauseating pain rolling through his abdomen. The kidney strike seized his back. He was hurt, seriously hurt, and the fight had barely begun. The crowd of enslaved people watched in complete silence. This was not following the expected pattern. The master was supposed to win easily. Was supposed to beat the slave to death within minutes. But Elijah was winning. Was controlling the fight. Was making Calvin look slow and graceless. The implications were enormous. If the master could be beaten, if he could bleed, then perhaps he wasn't as powerful as he had always appeared. Perhaps the system wasn't as solid. Perhaps resistance wasn't as impossible as they had been made to believe. Calvin attempted to grapple. Tried to make use of his size advantage, rushing in with arms outstretched, hoisting Elijah off the ground, trying to throw him down. But Elijah twisted, applied the technique Sarah had shown him, found leverage points, shifted his weight, redirected Calvin's force, and somehow reversed the throw. Calvin sailed through the air and hit the ground hard, a cloud of dust rising around him, the air driven from his lungs. Before he could gather himself, Elijah was on top of him, straddling his chest, fists falling in a steady rhythm. Face, throat, temples. Each strike deliberate, each one designed to inflict maximum harm. Calvin tried to shield his head, tried to cover up, but the blows kept finding their targets. His nose caved. Blood poured freely. His lips split open, teeth broke. His eyes began to close with swelling. The beating was systematic, methodical. 19 years of accumulated fury given precise, focused form. Marcus Cain began to move forward. The master was losing, was being beaten badly, and this could not be allowed to continue. But Sarah stepped directly into his path. An elderly woman placing herself between a young overseer and the circle. The master said it was a fair fight, she announced, loudly enough for everyone present to hear. Asterisk his words. Win and earn freedom, lose and die. Those were his exact terms. You step in now, you prove his word means nothing. You prove he can't win his own fights. Asterisk. Marcus stopped. She was right. Calvin had made this public, had declared the rules in front of everyone. If the overseers intervened, it would unravel everything, would reveal that the master's promises were hollow, would expose that he couldn't succeed without assistance. The other overseers exchanged uncertain looks. They wanted to help. But they were trapped inside the rules Calvin himself had set. In the circle, the beating continued. Elijah's fists fell again and again. Calvin was barely there anymore. His face was ruin, blood everywhere, bones broken. He tried feebly to push Elijah away but had nothing left. No strength. No leverage. No defense. He was being beaten to death in front of his own enslaved people, in front of his overseers, in front of every person whose fear had been his most prized possession. Finally, Elijah stopped. He rose. Looked down at Calvin, half-conscious, bleeding from everywhere, each breath labored. You said I'd win my freedom, Elijah said, loudly enough for the whole yard to hear. Asterisk, you said those were the rules. You lose, I'm free. That was your promise. Asterisk, he looked around at the gathered crowd, making sure every witness caught his words. Establishing his claim. Asterisk, I won. By your own rules. I'm free. Asterisk. For a moment, nobody moved. The enslaved were in shock. The white men were paralyzed by disbelief. Then Marcus found his voice. Asterisk, you're a dead man. You understand that. Even if you won the fight, you don't walk away from this. We'll track you down and we'll kill you, slow. Painful. We'll make an example that lasts for days. Asterisk, Elijah nodded. Asterisk, probably. But right now, right this moment, I'm free. I beat him. I won. And I want every person here to carry that. Remember that he's just a man. That he bleeds. That he can be defeated. Remember that you don't have to accept this. That resistance is real. Asterisk, he turned to face the enslaved people directly. Spoke to them, not to the white man. Asterisk, remember me. Remember what happened here. And when your moment arrives, when your chance comes, be ready. Be brave. Fight back. Asterisk. That was when the others arrived. Plantation owners from neighboring properties who had been visiting. Guests from the main house who had been watching from the porch. Additional overseers who had been out in distant fields. They came running when they heard the noise, coming to restore order, to punish this insurrection, to make an example that would never be forgotten. Within minutes, 20 white men encircled Elijah. All armed. Some with firearms. Some with whips. Some with clubs. 20 against 1. No realistic path to survival. But Sarah had prepared for this. She had spent weeks planning, recruiting allies, building contingency after contingency. The moment the white men began closing in on Elijah, she cried out a single word, a word in Igbo, her native language, a word the white men had no way of understanding. Ugbu now. And the plantation detonated into coordinated chaos. 60 enslaved people moved at once, not attacking the white men, which would have been suicide, but creating confusion. Running in all directions. Screaming. Making noise. Dropping tools with tremendous crashes. Generating sensory overload. The white men couldn't focus on Elijah because they were being overwhelmed by motion and noise and disorder on every side. They couldn't fire into the crowd without risking hitting each other or destroying valuable property. They were momentarily frozen. In that chaos, Elijah ran. He sprinted for the tree line, toward the woods, toward the slender possibility of escape. The white men opened fire. Gunshots split the humid air. Bullets hissed past him. Most missed, but one found his left shoulder. The impact spun him, drove him to one knee. Pain erupted through his upper body. He forced himself upright. Kept running. Reached the trees. Vanished into the forest. Behind him, the plantation descended into chaos, white men shouting commands, dogs barking, the hunt beginning to organize. But the confusion had bought Elijah precious time. By the time the white men assembled a proper pursuit and readied the dogs, Elijah had a 15-minute lead. And he had prepared for exactly this. He had spent weeks memorizing escape routes, marking trees with subtle signs only he would recognize, caching supplies along possible paths, creating false trails, doing everything within his power to improve his chances. The bullet wound in his shoulder was serious but not fatal. The round had passed through muscle without striking bone or any major blood vessel. It hurt badly, bled heavily, and would likely become infected. But it wouldn't stop him yet. He ran for an hour. Put real distance between himself and the plantation. Then he stopped at a buried cache, cloth for binding the wound, a knife, dried food, a canteen of water. He worked quickly, dressed the injury, slowed the bleeding, and kept moving. The next 3 days blurred together, pain and resolve, running and hiding. He moved mostly in darkness, sheltered in concealed locations through the day, followed streams to kill his scent, avoided every road and settlement. He survived on his cached supplies and whatever the land offered. On the second day, the shoulder wound became infected. Fever came. His body shook with chills in the August heat. He kept moving north. Always north. Following the North Star. Following the road to freedom. Back at Thornwood Plantation, Calvin survived, but barely. He spent 2 weeks in bed. A doctor from town confirmed he would live, but not without consequence. Broken bones that healed poorly. His face permanently disfigured. He lost his right eye. He would spend the rest of his life in chronic pain. But the physical damage was secondary to the psychological wound. He had been beaten in public by an enslaved man. Every person on that plantation had witnessed it. His aura of invincibility was gone. His authority was shattered. He was exposed as just a man who could suffer and lose and be humiliated. The other plantation owners were horrified. Not by Calvin's methods, most had found those acceptable enough, but by his failure. He had displayed weakness. Had allowed a slave to defeat him in front of witnesses. Had created a precedent that frightened them deeply. The story traveled fast. Within days, every enslaved person in the county had heard what Elijah had done to Master Thornwood. The story gave people something they had been starved of: hope. Ideas. The belief that resistance wasn't just a fantasy. The plantation owners understood the danger of that and moved to suppress it, insisting Elijah had somehow cheated, that Calvin had been unwell, manufacturing excuses. But the enslaved people had seen the truth with their own eyes, and no amount of insistence could undo that. Calvin sent slave catchers after Elijah, professional bounty hunters who made their living tracking runaways. He posted a reward of $1,000, an enormous sum, designed to draw hunters from multiple states. They searched for weeks. Found traces of Elijah's passage, blood on leaves from his wounded shoulder, footprints in soft mud, signs of encampments. But they never caught him. Never even came close. Because Elijah had help. The Underground Railroad, the secret network dedicated to guiding escaped enslaved people to free states, had been watching Thornwood Plantation. Conductors had learned of Calvin's brutality and had been searching for ways to intervene. When news of Elijah's escape and his remarkable fight reached them, they mobilized. They found him in Tennessee. He was barely alive. The infection had nearly taken him. His body was depleted by fever and near starvation. But he had made it out of Mississippi. Freedom was within reach. The conductors hid Elijah in a root cellar for 2 weeks. They treated the infected wound. Fed him. Let him recover. Then they moved him along the network, Tennessee to Kentucky, Kentucky to Ohio. Each segment of the journey carried risk. Each crossing demanded precision. But the conductors were experienced. They had moved hundreds before Elijah. They knew the routes, the safe houses, the methods for evading bounty hunters. In October of 1858, Elijah crossed into Ohio. He collapsed in the home of a Quaker family named Miller, delirious with fever. The Millers nursed him. It took weeks. But gradually Elijah came back to himself. His shoulder healed. His strength returned. And for the first time in his life, he was free. Actually, truly free, standing on soil where no one could claim him. No longer property. A human being with rights. But freedom arrived carrying grief. Elijah had left people behind. Grace, the woman he loved. Sarah, who had armed him with the knowledge to survive. The 60 enslaved people who had thrown themselves into chaos to buy him those precious minutes of escape. He learned later that Sarah had been flogged nearly to death as punishment for her role. That 3 other enslaved people had been sold south. That Grace had been sold to a plantation in Alabama. All of it a consequence of helping him. The guilt was crushing. He had purchased his freedom with their suffering. Elijah tried to go back for them. He tried to organize a rescue. He reached out to abolitionists, offered to personally guide a raid. They refused. Too dangerous. Too likely to end in failure, in death for everyone involved. They told him the most valuable thing he could do was survive. Build a life. Prove that escape was possible. Be a living symbol of hope. It wasn't what he wanted to hear. But it was the only answer that made any sense. In 1861, the Civil War began. Elijah enlisted without hesitation. He joined the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry, one of the first black regiments in the Union Army. He was 37 years old, strong and experienced and carrying a particular kind of fury. He fought at Island Mound in October of 1862. He fought at Honey Springs in July of 1863. He survived multiple engagements, rose to sergeant, led men into battle, killed Confederate soldiers without hesitation or guilt. Each one represented the system that had enslaved him. Each death felt like justice. When the war ended in 1865, Elijah was 41. He returned to Mississippi as part of the Union occupying forces. He went back to Thornwood Plantation, found it burned and abandoned. Calvin had fled when Union troops advanced and never returned. The plantation was seized by the government. The land was supposed to be redistributed to freed people, but that promise was broken. Eventually it was sold to northern investors. The people who had worked and suffered and bled on that land received nothing. Elijah found Sarah still there. She had endured the war. She was 72, free at last, but with nowhere to go, no resources, no one to care for her. Elijah took her north, settled her in Cincinnati, paid for her care, visited her regularly and listened to her stories. She lived 3 more years, dying in 1868. Her final words to Elijah, *, "You made it count. You made my sacrifice worth something. Thank you." *. He searched for grace. Learned she had been sold multiple times across multiple plantations. Her last known location was a property near Mobile, Alabama. But when he traced her there in 1866, she was gone, dead from cholera in 1864. She had never known slavery ended. Never known Elijah survived. Never got to feel what freedom felt like. The loss broke something in him. He had carried the dream of finding her, of building a life with her, of giving her everything that had been taken from them both. That dream died with her. Elijah settled in Ohio. In 1867 he married a woman named Rebecca, a formerly enslaved woman from Kentucky who understood his pain, his nightmares, his survivor's guilt, the way those things lived in a person long after the chains were gone. They built a life together. Had 7 children. Worked hard, acquired land, farmed it, raised their family in freedom. Taught their children to read and write. Sent them to school. Gave them every opportunity that had been stolen from him. But Elijah never let go of August 15, 1858. He told the story throughout his life, to his children, to his grandchildren, to anyone who would sit still and listen. He made certain it was recorded. Made certain it was preserved. The story of the day an enslaved man defeated his master in single combat. The day the impossible happened. The day one man's courage lit a flame in hundreds. Elijah lived until 1903, dying at 79, surrounded by 14 grandchildren, 23 great-grandchildren, all free, all educated, all knowing who their grandfather was and what he had done. His funeral drew over 200 people, black and white, veterans who had fought beside him, abolitionists who had helped him escape, family who loved him, friends who respected him. They buried him in a cemetery outside Cincinnati. His gravestone read, * Elijah Freeman. Born into bondage, 1824. Died in freedom, 1903. He fought back, *. The story of Elijah and Calvin spread across communities and across generations. The black community preserved it with care, passed it down, told it as proof that masters could be beaten, that the system could be resisted, that courage had consequence. The story grew with the telling. Some versions claimed Elijah killed Calvin. Some said he liberated every enslaved person on the plantation. Some described him as 7 feet tall, killing 10 men barehanded. Exaggerations, all of them, but each one rooted in the same core truth: a slave had beaten his master and walked away free. White historians attempted to bury the story. They claimed it never happened, that no documentation existed, that it was mythology constructed to inspire rebellion. But the evidence was there for anyone willing to look. Court records confirmed Calvin Thornwood owned a Mississippi plantation. Census records documented his enslaved people. Newspaper accounts from 1858 referenced an incident at Thornwood Plantation involving an escaped slave. Veteran records showed a man named Elijah Freeman serving with the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry. The pieces were there. The truth was findable. In 2010, a coalition of local historians and civil rights activists successfully lobbied for a historical marker. It was placed on County Road 12, where Thornwood Plantation once stood. The land grows soybeans and corn now, where cotton once did. But the marker stands. It reads: Asterisk site of Thornwood Plantation, 1847 to 1865. In August 1858, an enslaved man named Elijah defeated his master Calvin Thornwood in single combat and escaped to freedom. His courage inspired countless others to resist oppression. His story reminds us that even in the darkest times, resistance is possible. Asterisk. A small acknowledgement. An incomplete account. But better than silence. Better than erasure. Better than pretending none of it happened. The marker receives visitors. Descendants of Elijah come to stand where it occurred. Civil rights organizations bring students to hear the story. People leave flowers. Small stones. Quiet tributes to a man who refused to accept the fate that had been assigned to him. Who fought? Who won? What do you make of Elijah's story? Was his violence justified? Should he have chosen escape over confrontation? Should Sarah and the others have helped him, knowing what it would cost them? Should he carry guilt for the suffering his escape brought down on the people he left behind? These questions resist simple answers. Violence in resistance to oppression is morally complex. Helping someone toward freedom when you know the punishment coming for you demands extraordinary courage. Surviving when others don't is a burden that doesn't lift. But what cannot be disputed is this: Elijah refused to accept the life that had been forced on him. He chose to fight. He chose freedom over safety. And through intelligence, careful planning, and uncommon courage, he achieved what every force around him insisted was impossible. His story matters because it pushes back against the myth of the passive slave, the idea that enslaved people accepted their bondage, that they didn't resist, that they waited for someone else to come and save them. Stories like Elijah's prove the opposite. Resistance was constant. Relentless. People fought back in every way available to them. They were strategic. They were patient. They were dangerous when given the opening. The system of slavery required unceasing, overwhelming violence to maintain itself, because the people being enslaved never stopped fighting it. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with people who need to understand that resistance is always possible. That courage has weight. That ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That systems of oppression are not permanent. That the weak aren't always weak, and the strong aren't always strong. Until next time, remember, history is full of moments when someone refused to accept injustice. When someone rose despite impossible odds. When someone fought back and won. Be that person when your moment comes. Until next video.